the internet was that the internet companies, were all centered in California. And there have been different waves of how networked, how non-networked they were. I think probably 2021, sort of the COVID moving away from California. The big thing in tech was crypto, and crypto had this conceit of a alternate currency, decentralized, away from the central banks, but also the crypto companies, the crypto protocols. You could do those from anywhere. You could do them outside the U.S. You could do them from Miami, and so crypto was something where the tech could naturally move out of California, and today probably the core tech narrative is completely flipped to AI, and then there's something about AI that's very centralized. I had this one-liner years ago where it was if we say that crypto is libertarian, can we also say that AI is communist, or something like this, where the natural structure for an AI company looks like it's a big company, and then somehow the AI stuff feels like it's going to be dominated by the big tech companies in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so if that's the future of tech.
Yeah.
The scale, the natural scale of the industry tells you that it's going to be extremely hard to get out of the San Francisco Bay Area.
When you look to the future and you try to just make a guess as to how all this is going to turn out with AI, what do you think we're looking at over the next 5 years?
Man, I think I should start by being modest in answering that question and saying that nobody has a clue.
Right, which is true. Which pretty much all the experts say.
I would say, let me do sort of a history. The riff I always had on this was that I can't stand any of the buzzwords, and I felt AI. There's all this big data, cloud computing. There were all these crazy buzzwords people had, and they always were ways to sort of abstract things and get away from reality somehow, and were not good ways of talking about things. And I thought AI was this incredible abstraction because it can mean the next generation of computers, it can mean the last generation of computers, it can mean anything in between. And if you think about the AI discussion in the 2010s, pre-OpenAI, ChatGPT, and the revolution of the last 2 years, but the 2010s AI discussion, maybe it was, so I'll start with the history before I get to the future, but the history of it was maybe anchored on two visions of what AI meant. And one was Nick Bostrom, Oxford prof, who wrote this book, Superintelligence, 2014. And it was basically AI was going to be this super duper intelligent thing, way godlike intelligence, way smarter than any human being. And then there was sort of the CCP, Chinese Communist rebuttal, the Kai-Fu Lee book from 2018, AI Superpowers. And I think the subtitle was something like The Race for AI Between Silicon Valley and China, or something like this. And it was sort of, it defined AI as, it was fairly low tech. It was just surveillance, facial recognition technology. We would just have this sort of totalitarian Stalinist monitoring. It didn't require very much innovation. It just required that you apply things. And basically the subtext was China's going to win because we have no ethical qualms in China about applying this sort of basic machine learning to sort of measuring or controlling the population. And those were sort of like, say, two extreme competing visions of what AI would mean in the 2010s, and that sort of maybe were sort of the anchors of the AI debate. And then what happened in some sense with ChatGPT in late 22, early 23 was that the achievement you got, you did not get superintelligence. It was not just surveillance tech, but it was you actually got to the holy grail of what people would have defined AI as from 1950 to 2010. For the previous 60 years, before the 2010s, people have always said AI, the definition of AI is passing the Turing test. And the Turing test, it basically means that the computer can fool you into thinking that it's a human being. And it's a somewhat fuzzy test because, obviously you can have an expert on the computer, a non-expert. Does it fool you all the time or some of the time? How good is it? But to first approximation, the Turing test, we weren't even close to passing it in 2021. And then, ChatGPT basically passes the Turing test, at least for let's say an IQ 100 average person. It's passed the Turing test. And that was the holy grail. That was the holy grail of AI research for the previous 60 years. And so there's probably some psychological or sociological history where we can say that this weird debate between Bostrom about superintelligence and Kai-Fu Lee about surveillance tech was like this almost like psychological suppression people had, where they were not thinking, they lost track of the Turing test, of the holy grail, because it was about to happen. And it was such a significant, such an important thing that you didn't even want to think about it. So I'm tempted to give almost a psychological repression theory of the 2010s debates. But be that as it may, the Turing test gets passed, and that's an extraordinary achievement. And then, maybe, and then, where does it go from here? There probably are ways you can refine these. It's still going to be, a long time to apply it. There's a question. There's this AGI discussion. Will we get artificial general intelligence, which is a hopelessly vague concept, which, general intelligence could be just a generally smart human being. So is that just a person with an IQ of 130? Or is it super intelligence? Is it godlike intelligence? So it's sort of an ambiguous thing. But I keep thinking that maybe the AGI question's less important than passing the Turing test. If we got AGI, if we got, let's say, super intelligence, that would be interesting to Mr. God, because you'd have competition for being God. But surely the Turing test is more important for us humans, because it's either a complement or a substitute to humans, and so it's going to rearrange the economic, cultural, political structure of our society in extremely dramatic ways. And I think maybe what's already happened is much more important than anything else that's going to be done. And then it's just going to be a long ways in applying it. One last thought. The analogy I'm always tempted to go to, and these things are never, historical analogies are never perfect, but it's that maybe AI in 2023, 24 is like the internet in 1999, where on one level it's clear the internet's going to be big and get a lot bigger, and it's going to dominate the economy. It's going to rearrange the society in the 21st century. And then at the same time, it was a complete bubble, and people had no idea how the business models worked. Almost everything blew up. It took, it didn't take that long in the scheme of things. It took, 15, 20 years for it to become super dominant. But it didn't happen sort of in 18 months as people fantasized in 1999. And maybe what we have in AI is something like this. It's figuring out how to actually apply it, in sort of all these different ways is going to take something like 2 decades. But that doesn't distract from it being a really big deal.
It is a really big deal, and I think you're right about the Turing test. Do you think that the lack of acknowledgement or the public celebration, or at least this mainstream discussion, which I think should be everywhere, that we've passed the Turing test, do you think it's connected to the fact that this stuff accelerates so rapidly that even though we've essentially breached this new territory, we still know that GPT-5 is going to be better, GPT-6 is going to be insane, and then they're working on these right now, and the change is happening so quickly. We're almost a little reluctant to acknowledge where we're at.
Yeah, you know, I've often, you know, probably for 15 years or so, often been on the side that there isn't that much progress in science or tech, or not as much as Silicon Valley likes to claim. And even on the AI level, I think it's a massive technical achievement. It's still an open question. You know, is it actually going to lead to much higher living standards for everybody? You know, the internet was a massive achievement. How much did it raise people's living standards? Much trickier question. So, but in this world where not much has happened, one of the paradoxes of an era of relative tech stagnation is that when something does happen, we don't even know how to process it. So, you know, I think Bitcoin was a big invention. We can debate whether it was good or bad, but it was a pretty big deal, and it was systematically underestimated for at least, you know, the first 10, 11 years. And you know, you could trade it. It went up smoothly for 10, 11 years. It didn't get repriced all at once because we're in a world where nothing big ever happens, and so we have no way of processing it when something pretty big happens. The internet was pretty big in '99. Bitcoin was moderately big. The internet was really big. Bitcoin was moderately big, and I'd say passing the Turing test is really big. It's on the same scale as the internet, and because our lived experience is that so little has felt like it's been changing for the last few decades, we're probably underestimating it.
It's interesting that you say that so little, we feel like so little has changed, because if you're a person, how old are you?
Same age as you were,
Okay.
born 1967.
So in our age, we've seen all the change, right? We saw the end of the Cold War. We saw answering machines. We saw VHS tapes. Then we saw the internet. And then where we're at right now, which is like this bizarre moment in time where people carry the internet around with them in their pocket every day. And these super sophisticated computers that are ubiquitous. Everybody has one. There's incredible technology that's being ramped up every year. They're getting better all the time. And now there's AI. There's AI on your phone. You could access ChatGPT and a bunch of different programs on your phone. And I think that's an insane change. I think that's one of the most, especially with the use of social media, it's one of the most bizarre changes I think our culture's ever, most bizarre.
It can be a big change culturally or politically, but the kinds of questions I'd ask is, how do you measure it economically? How much does it change GDP? How much does it change productivity? And certainly the story I would generally tell for the last 50 years, since the 1970s, early 70s, is that we've been not absolute stagnation, we've been in an era of relative stagnation where there has been very limited progress in the world of atoms, the world of physical things. And there has been a lot of progress in the world of bits, information, computers, internet, mobile internet, you know, now AI.
What are you referring to when you say the world of physical things?
You know, if we had defined technology, if we were sitting here in 1967, the year we were born, and we had a discussion about technology, what technology would have meant? It would have meant computers. It would have also meant rockets. It would have meant supersonic airplanes. It would have meant new medicines. It would have meant the green revolution in agriculture, maybe underwater cities. You know, it sort of had, because technology simply gets defined as that which is changing, that which is progressing. And so there was progress on all these fronts. Today, last 20 years, when you talk about technology, you're normally just talking about information technology. Technology has been reduced to meaning computers. And that tells you that the structure of progress has been weird. There's been this narrow cone of very intense progress around the world of bits, around the world of computers, and then all the other areas have been relatively stagnant. We're not moving any faster. You know, the Concorde got decommissioned in 2003 or whenever. And then with all the low-tech airport security measures, it takes even longer to fly, to get through all of them from one city to the next. You know, the highways have gone backwards because there are more traffic jams. We haven't figured out ways around those. So we're literally moving slower than we were 40 or 50 years ago. And then and that's sort of the and then of course there's also a sense in which the screens and the devices, have this effect of distracting us from this. So when you're riding a 100-year-old subway in New York City, and you're looking at your iPhone, you can look at, wow, this is this cool new gadget, but you're also being distracted from the fact that your lived environment hasn't changed, in 100 years. And so there's a question: how important is this world of bits versus the world of atoms? I would say, as human beings, we're physically embodied in a material world, and so I would always say this world of atoms is pretty important. And when that's pretty stagnant, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense.